Okay.
And you again.
Oh, our youngest is last in college and he put out towards him. I was like, okay.
Did I have you call with me?
Right.
Yeah, I had a meeting with Clerk in the state today, so I'm doing a little driving tour in the rain.
And one day, and I left on that, and there was a stopover, so I've been.
And if we don't get a quorum, we've been,
With the layover,
if we don't
I
have
got
a
to
quorum.
Boston and, I got.
Yeah, you do anyways, you can't obviously make any decisions. Yeah.
You're not going to anyways, I mean necessarily.
All the way down.
Good, I guess, but-
So-
Yeah. If you don't have a quorum, you can listen to the presentation. You just can't do any deliberation or any action.
Yeah, we can ask questions. You're good.
Oh, my God.
Other,
Do we know if the other three are coming?
I haven't heard anything. I've heard nothing from anybody.
Okay, I'm gonna text them right now.
There today, just, since there's people here.
Oh, yeah, that's.
Besides Joe, is that okay?
Yeah.
How are you? Now I'm trying to get my mom in Sarasota. We're trying to get her in one. Trying to go to category 5.
Yeah, it's gonna hit hard.
Yeah.
She got, Malik, she got stuck in her apartment building because the water came into the elevated tank and the salt water like shut down. She was stuck on the 17th floor and she's in a walker and like, and fire, it wouldn't come get because it wasn't an emergency to get her out. But I mean, that was a nightmare. So now with this one being even worse and likely to hit Sarah, so
Get out of there, yeah.
I'm like, yeah,
Tracy McDonald
I
is
gotta get you in one somewhere.
just about to go through a cat.
Connecticut.
Probably was supposed to fly.
I have a place like, she'd be safer in Miami than she would be.
I mean, not, he's on the East Coast, but still.
Sadly.
I
How are you?
How's it going?
Good.
Made it over?
Paddle.
Like,
alone.
Ooh.
Great.
I have my first match Thursday. I'm gonna get home.
You play paddle? Yes. Love it.
And
You play here sometime.
yeah, well, now I know someone.
I'm President.
Do you guys do pickle too? Or?
We do. We have 4 paddle, 4 pickles. And we're expanding.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I know.
Paddle's so fun.
Oh.
And it's just to get outside and do winter. I would too. It's just so good for your mental health to get outside. I don't know. It's just really.
Just
It's
a
good.
reminder that all conversations are being recorded because we are live on TV, live on YouTube.
Yeah, did everyone hear that? We're live on TV right now, so just so you know.
You can see Jared.
Always.
So it's 3:02.
Matt is not coming. He is flying back from New York City.
Right, that I remember now. Okay.
I didn't.
Okay, oh, Janet's there, but it's a webinar, so she's not.
One's away.
She's on, but not a panelist.
Oh, do you need her to be a panelist?
No, I
Where's she
don't.
back?
I can promote her to panelist if you need her.
I don't know, should we promote Janet? Are we allowed to make decisions?
I'm not sure where she was. Yeah.
Do you guys like that panoramic screen on there? Or do you want me to take it off? Do you like the panoramic?
Oh,
I find I'm distracted.
I don't feel like I need to look at us.
All of us. It's such an interestingly distorted view and then it's. I'll take it off, put it back on if somebody wants it.
Oh, there's
I
done.
know.
Right.
Sorry, was that Dawn?
Yes, Don.
Yeah. So, so I'm gonna go ahead and call the select board meeting to order. What we're gonna do is we're gonna call each board and committee serially fit quorum to order and take a roll call of who's present for the record for minutes purposes. So I will call the select board meeting of Monday, special meeting Monday, October 7th to order at 3:04 p.m. And I'm going to ask Dawn to acknowledge her presence.
Yes.
and Tom,
Here.
and Brooks here from the select board.
Words.
So there's three of us. Veronica, do you have a quorum?
Yes, I do.
Would you like to call your meeting to order? And
Okay, for Councilman Sarah, services, excuse me, Sarah Wright. Here. Amanda Wright. Here. Not related. Tara Steering. Here. Kelly Stebbin. Here. Sue Minnigan.
Here.
And myself, Veronica Bolchek. We have quorum for Council for Human Services on Contract Review Committee, Joanna Roach. She was there.
she's there. Joanna, can you unmute and acknowledge?
She may be driving. I suggest we give her the connect.
Okay,
Yes, I'm here.
okay,
Okay,
thank
thanks.
you. Sue Minnigan,
Here.
Bert Johnson,
Here.
and then John Blush.
Here.
And myself, Veronica Bolchek, we have quorum for contract review committee.
Okay.
Veronica, I'm also here, Suzanne Keating for CHS.
Thank you. Did not see you up there.
Sorry, Suzanne.
Okay, everybody been acknowledged? Anybody else here that wasn't called? Okay, I'm gonna turn it right over to Julia from Reftelis
Great.
to walk us through.
All right, thank you so much. And my colleague Emily Usselton is somewhere out there in the ether, and she's going to share her screen, and she and I are going to walk you all through this today. Our plan for the presentation is first just to give everyone an overview of the project. We talked to many of you, if not all of you, as part of this work, but we want to just kind of remind you of what the questions we were asked to answer and kind of what our process looked like. And then we want to share with you both the observations that we've made, some analysis that we've done based on the research, and best practices, and give you what our preliminary recommendations are. And I will tell you, you know, sometimes people just think the recommendations we make are just the best things ever, and they're all excited about it and can't wait to do all of them. And sometimes people are like, you're clearly not from around here. And why would you ever recommend something like that? And what we're bringing to you is kind of an objective outside perspective from consultants who work nationally with local governments, exclusively local governments and utilities. Best practices from jurisdictions that you asked us to compare the town to. And then the survey work and the research that we've done to make these recommendations. Ultimately, it's up to you to decide how, if, and what you want to do to make the process work, I'll say even better for you, because certainly there are a lot of things about the process that work well, and you all do a lot of great work with the funds that you have here on the island. So that's what we'll be doing, and then talk about next steps. So the objectives for this particular evaluation, one was to really get some clarity about roles and responsibilities. So, you know, we've introduced the select board, there's the CHS, there's the contract review committee, there's staff from human services. Each of you has a role to play in the process of providing the grant funding for the different agencies in the community. And so what's some clarity around that? How do you evaluate the decision-making process? So what does that look like from your all's perspective? And then how could we make that process more efficient, better meet the needs that people on the island have? So as far as what we've done so far, and part of doing this work, we did interviews with town staff, with some former town staff as well, who were involved in the process. Gave the select board members opportunities to be interviewed, and spoke with most of you, the ones that are here. Talked to the finance committee, CHS and the CRC, and we really do appreciate the time that people took to participate in the interviews with Emily and I. And then we reviewed a lot of data, a year's worth of applications, the summary reports that the CRC does, and makes the recommendations for what agencies you want to provide funding for. We did a survey of applicants, anybody who had applied for funds from the town in the last 5 years. Were given an opportunity to give us input directly about how they experienced the process. And so we have that information that we'll share. And then we did that benchmarking analysis from the different communities that you were interested in knowing, well, what do these other places do that we think we're a little bit like, or they have some similar features? And then we've summarized these themes and observations that we're going to go over today, and have those findings and recommendations. So in terms of observations, just kind of at a high level, what do we see when we look at your process? And the first comes back to what needs are you all meeting when you're providing these grants to the different agencies in the community? The needs assessment that you have was done in 2010. A lot's changed since then, and so it's not current. It needs to be updated. And I think it could be a real energizing activity for the CHS, just kind of thinking about what the needs are in the community and how you all can work to even better support those. And certainly the pandemic revealed a lot of different types of needs, mental health needs in the community that you all definitely are trying to respond to. But again, you don't have that foundational document of the needs assessment to lean on as you're making decisions for what you want to fund and why you want to fund it. There's also just an inconsistent understanding, I would say, from an applicant perspective, and maybe even from some of you, what are we doing as a town when we provide funds to the agencies? Are we giving them supplemental funding because we know this is a need our community has, and we want to make sure it is provided for those who couldn't purchase it themselves? And so we use the Human Services grant funds as a way of meeting a community need. Is it seed money for new programs, ideas, things that might be a great program to have? Which is it? Is it both? Is it a little bit of this, a little bit of that? And I think people have a different understanding of that. And there's not clarity around that for folks in terms of what you're there to do. And then the process itself, I would say, is very volunteer dependent. You all do a tremendous amount of work to make this happen. And that is not something that I think that we see, and maybe I'll talk more about that under process recommendations. But the other piece of this is that the folks on the CHS and CRC, one of the reasons you're the perfect people to be on the committee is because you have experience in this world. And sometimes that also leads to relationships and perceptions and understandings of different agencies that could create the appearance of a conflict. And so managing against that is something I think you all are always aware of and are doing. It's just something that we also wanted to make sure we acknowledged as part of the work that we did. Process observations, the volunteer dependency. So that's certainly, there are things that you all do as volunteers that I would say is unusual in our experience in working with other communities across the country. This is a very volunteer heavy process. Things that we would normally see staff doing in other jurisdictions, the volunteers here on Nantucket are doing it. And then there's this issue of practice.
Can't get it through on my computer.
Really? Then there's this issue of practice and procedure. And when I say like these words, your practice and your procedures aren't consistent, that sounds kind of damning, and that's not the intention. This is the case in so many instances, because what happens is we write our procedures down at some point in time when we're all on the same page and it makes sense. And then life happens and we make adjustments, and we're always refining the practices that we use to make sense for the situation that we're in. But you end up with a misalignment between what's written down and what you actually do, what works. And so this is just an opportunity as you reset to kind of get back to level ground in terms of procedure and practice. The role clarification piece is one that I think could really be helpful, and the way we'll frame our recommendations around that. And we expect it to be somewhat collaborative in terms of really understanding how each of the different committees, the board, CHS, CRC, and the staff, how you each work together to make this process work for the community. And then finally, a few tweaks in terms of process, and we think it can be even more efficient. So I'm going to ask my colleague Emily to review the benchmarking and survey results with you all. Emily is a manager with our firm. She's actually up in Westford right now, where she's going to be doing some work for the next couple of days on a project. So she flew in this morning from Detroit. So Emily.
Hi everyone, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Awesome. It's great to be with some of you again. Wanted to walk you through some of the underlying data and analysis that we did as part of the project to really inform the recommendations that we're going to go through after that. So we'll start with the benchmarking. If I can get the computer to work here, there we go. There are 5 communities that we reviewed as kind of part of the project scope. And again, these were communities that the town selected, obviously due to proximity and other characteristics, and we'll go through that. And we looked at various demographic characteristics and then really tried to understand their process and how that compares to the way Nantucket's Human Services grant process works. This is a healthy table of a lot of information, but we wanted to share with you some of the interesting characteristics across the 5 communities. So what I would say is on the left-hand side, we'll sort of orient you to just overall funding. So it's going to give the size of the community, how much funding they typically award in an annual process. And this is from their budget documents or publicly available information for the most recent cycle. And then looking at their kind of funding per capita to normalize and can compare that sort of across the various communities. And for each of these, you'll see a benchmark median. That's essentially just that, the median kind of without Nantucket to sort of compare how Nantucket may fall. And then on the right side of the table are some of the select characteristics that we thought were interesting in terms of indicators of need or potential need in human services space for the town of Nantucket or these other communities. There's more characteristics that you'll see in the report, but these were the ones we thought were worth highlighting. So if we start from the funding perspective, Nantucket is really unmatched in a per capita funding perspective. This is just assuming the 650,000 annual appropriation for the general human services needs that you all have on an annual basis. It does not include the special purpose appropriation for substance use. If you were to add that, it would be an even higher funding per capita amount of about $57.21. So far above kind of the benchmark median and the closest community. And then some of the other relative demographic characteristics, we found that Nantucket is probably most closely aligned with Greenwich in terms of overall median home value and household income. And then when you look at the kind of the median mark for some of these other indicators, Nantucket's essentially in line from a federal poverty level perspective, those falling below the FPL. But does have a higher non-white race population, foreign-born population, and children or those under the age of 18, which are all sort of proxies for potential human services needs in a community.
Just in case you all can't read the chart, it was 4507 is what Nantucket's per capita spending is without the 175,000. And again, it's just not even close. The next closest was 2751 in the town departments.
Yes. So as Julia alluded to,
Excellent.
nearly 90% higher than the median on a per capita funding basis, more than 50% higher than the next closest community. And as mentioned, we also looked at process. And so a couple things worth noting here. There are 2 communities that don't follow sort of what I would call the standard public sector RFP process, awarding the grant through the right for proposal or request for proposal process. That's Greenwich and Mashpee. Mashpee largely is because the award amount is relatively small. So we're talking about $10,000 or less, which probably allows them to fall below procurement thresholds and the requirements of a more robust RFP process. Greenwich is certainly unique in sort of the way that they've set up the process. So essentially, they have an outside agency that is a nonprofit that is the grant administration for the human services needs for the entire community. So what the town of Greenwich does is elect through its budget process each year how much it would like to award or appropriate to that outside agency. And then that goes through the normal approval channels of your budget development process. And then essentially that nonprofit agency is administering all funds from all of the different sources that they're receiving grants or funding support from. So certainly a unique model, I would say, in Greenwich. And then the other thing that stood out to us that is certainly unique for Nantucket as well is no other community really had 2 distinct oversight bodies. They either had the select board or some committee that was specific around human services, but they did not have, a human services or a council for human services and then a CRC or 2 kind of unique bodies involved in the grant process. I want to also walk you through just very quickly some of the applicant survey results. One of the things I'll say is overall, there was high level of agreement in many of the statements in the survey. So as Julia alluded to, we went back in the great historical data that the town supplied us with and looked at anyone who had applied for funding, whether they received it or not, over the last 5 years, which is about 24 organizations, and invited them to participate in the survey. We heard from 17 respondents, representing about 14 of those organizations, and really a broad base of all the service areas, the human service areas in the town. And respondents were essentially asked to, on a Likert scale of 4, strongly agree, disagree, strongly disagree, to show their alignment with each of these statements. And then we asked them the opportunity for kind of open response, open comment at the end of the survey. And so we'll kind of go through each of the statements, starting with the lowest level of agreement to the highest, but again, low being subjective. So 70% is a pretty strong level of agreement overall, I would say, of respondents that felt that the process, the evaluation, the recommendation process was fair. Even higher levels, so over 3/4 of respondents agreed that there was a clear relationship between the needs in the community and the way that the grants were being funded and prioritized. Most agreed that the process itself for applying was easy to navigate, and that the materials that they received to inform them on how to apply were sufficient. And that the reporting requirements, this was the highest level of agreement, the reporting requirements or the monitoring kind of post-application, post-award were, easy to understand. So if we package all of those 5 kind of statements together, these are kind of the levels of agreement between strongly agree and agree. And you can see, strong agreement really across the board, the highest level among the quarterly reporting or the monitoring requirements, and the lowest among fairness, but again, still very high at 70%. In the open-ended responses, some of the key themes that emerged from that analysis, one is those who offered suggestions, so not all of those that responded, but those who did offer suggestions, suggested enhancing the objectivity around potentially cycling members of the CRC. Every so often, opportunities to state how the data or what specific data is needed, both in the application and the reporting requirements. So some specificity around what is needed in each of those 2 pieces of the process. And then in the public setting, the opportunity to respond if inaccurate information is being shared in a public setting.
So kind of that's the context and what we learned and what we saw. And so we want to go over with you preliminary recommendations. And again, this is where we're going to be interested in feedback from the town, and obviously it's up to you to decide about what makes sense to implement and not. So I'm going to start with the oversight, and then I'll have Emily kind of walk through the process recommendations. So, Emily mentioned, and we've talked about, there's all these different groups that are involved, and you each have a role to play. And having kind of a workshop where we can go through what each group's roles are, reaffirm CHS as really the policy setting board for human services, I think could be really helpful. With CRC being a subcommittee of CHS, I know there's history here with kind of activity of people on the committee. CHS didn't meet as regularly for a while. That's been reinvigorated, but kind of reestablishing that CHS is the policy body and CRC is a subcommittee that has a very specific role. But we think that would be a very useful conversation to have, as well as clarity from the select board, who ultimately, approves contracts and appropriate after the town meeting appropriates the funds. So we think that could be quite useful. The other piece, this is the part where you may or may not agree with this. But the CHS and the CRC, Emily mentioned, you're the only group that has these 2 different committees that kind of play in the same area. And the question is, does that make sense? Does it still make sense? The CRC remained active even when the CHS didn't, in part because it had a very specific function to accomplish each year. It was not necessarily the policy conversations at the CHS weren't happening. There were not, your needs assessment was old. Does the 2 committee structure make sense? Or could the CHS also be the body that makes the recommendations on the contracts and does that review? So something for you all to consider. The ethical obligations, just reminding, I think, kind of we think it's a best practice for boards and committees across the country for new board members to get a reminder about what are their responsibilities. How do I find out if I should recuse myself? Do I make a statement that I am recusing or that I am not recusing? And this is why. Those types of things, I think, given everyone's expertise in this particular area, just could be very level setting at the beginning of the process for everyone to know who's in and who's out on what types of conversations and why that makes sense. And then the last one is, kind of the chair appointments. We see other committees in the town very regularly changing the chair, kind of rotating leadership. And that hasn't happened with the CRC. And it's something to just be thinking about as you all kind of cultivate the volunteer pool. Does it make sense to also have some rotation there in terms of who the chair is and how long they might serve? So I know, again, those are recommendations that have to fit you all. The volunteer commitment is very heavy. The chair of the CRC has done a lot of what we would consider to be staff work over the years. That may not be something every volunteer can take on. And it's also then important to ask, well, is this a reasonable expectation to have of people who are volunteering their time for the town? So, and then the updating the community needs assessment. This can be a very straightforward process. I think it sounds a little bit daunting, but we've kind of identified and we'll lay out in the report kind of what are the 7 steps and how you would go through doing that. And it's something that you probably ought to do every 3 years, maybe 5, but things change so quickly these days that checking in with it doesn't have to mean that you redo it every time, but just checking in to make sure it's accurate, that it's reflecting the needs in the community, I think is very important. And so, like I said, we've laid out what those 7 steps would be to update the needs assessment, and that there'll be more verbiage around that in the report, obviously, but we wanted to try to break it down to what would you need to do if you're going to take this on as a project. So Emily, you want to walk through the process pieces?
Sure. So as Julia alluded to, and as a lot of kind of the contextual information that we've shared with you so far, the roles and responsibilities, the clarity around that really drove a lot of the recommendations in the process in the grants management part of our project work. We feel like there's certainly a need to elevate kind of the policymaking role that the CHS has, and that really anchors in the community needs assessment. So, to us, if that becomes a living document of really understanding what is going on in the community and where are the most pressing needs, it sets the policy tone and then thereby the funding needs in a given year or a given few years. So, kind of written in bylaw and what makes sense also in practice is to have CHS be that connection with potential applicants, organizations in the community to know what's going on. So if there are questions about, hey, do I qualify for this funding source, or we may be interested in starting this particular program, would the town be able to support us? The CHS, is really the person or the individual to kind of explain that and connect the resourcing to the policy needs. And beyond maybe a 3 to 5 year needs assessment, also just what the evaluation criteria needs to be for the CRC. Give them sort of the roadmap of how to think about the funding recommendations from a policy perspective. And then similarly with town staff, ensuring that policy needs that will result or may result in potential changes in resourcing are being communicated to town staff and then put through in kind of the normal budget development process. So in the fall, as new needs are arising and you all are thinking about appropriations, if the funding allocations need to change, that's a conversation between town staff and the CHS. And then, that sort of elevation or anchoring in the policy will then clarify, we think, kind of the responsibilities as a subcommittee for the CRC. So with a solid kind of criteria for evaluation, they can move forward with recommendations of funding, kind of knowing what the policy priorities and directives are. As mentioned, we also thought about, what we've seen in the national landscape and among the benchmarking communities of what is typical administrative responsibilities or town staff focus areas versus a volunteer-based board, given kind of time and capacity. The first is, 3 areas that we considered and talk about in the report. First is budget development. Again, we mentioned this earlier, but that coordination between the policymaking body and the resourcing and needs to make sure that it is kind of following suit in the normal timeline. One area where we felt like the CRC in particular was doing quite a bit of workload for a volunteer-based organization was in the quarterly compliance review. And we learned that, part of that's intentional as written. The CHS and the CRC do have to approve the kind of quarterly disbursement and requirements for, the monitoring phase of the contracts. But given that, there's still a role that, through standardizing what that reporting looks like and conducting the reviews, the town staff can really get them most of the way, provide the recommendations for approval, make sure that they're checking all the boxes so that the work of, agreeing to or approving the distributions becomes perhaps more procedural for the volunteer-based group. And then, with a process like this, we learned a lot about the history of this process. It's been around for a very long time. And as Julia alluded to, it's not uncommon that, practice and times can deviate from written procedure, and that's okay. But there's also turnover among town staff. And so we think it would be valuable and useful to make sure that the expectations between how town staff support and plan for the CHS and the CRC kind of roles, responsibilities, and public meetings is clear, and that both stakeholders understand what's expected of them kind of upfront. A lot of the process recommendations, probably not surprisingly, focus on standardization. And again, I think Nantucket's a good way there in terms of what we saw in the other communities. You all recently instituted a rubric, I believe it was this most recent cycle. And that's certainly a best practice. It's something we saw among the benchmarking communities and that we see really across the country. One of the ways to sort of take that to the next level is to kind of formally develop the scoring and documentation around that. And what that does is build transparency, right? It helps build that objectivity into the review process, gives you a basis for how the decision-making was determined in a given cycle in a given year. The other thing we heard, especially among the stakeholder conversations, and this is, I think, important, is the role that the town plays really is a financial oversight role. They're providing resources for services that are happening and being deployed by other organizations in the town. And so we recommend adding criteria around the budgetary aspects of how these programs are funded, especially if there is outside funding that is complementing, or there are match funds that are complementing how the town funds are being used. So, if there is fundraising that goes alongside town funds for the complete kind of programmatic budget of a particular area that you all are supporting, that's good information to know in the evaluation process. We've talked about this already, but really creating a better connection as the community needs assessment is updated, making sure that it's really clear how that translates to your rubric. So as you're going through the scoring criteria, it's a clear connection to the policy directives outlined in the community needs assessment. And then again, one of the practice areas, that we've learned, COVID changed a lot of things. At one point, I think there were on-site kind of visits. That doesn't really happen as much now. There may be interviews, but it might not be with every organization. It may just sort of be as needed. Our recommendation is whatever the format is, make sure that it's consistent for all organizations involved in the process. So if interviews are part of the process for evaluation, it should be required of all the organizations, and they should have sort of a standard kind of framework or format to follow to know what to expect in that process. Then I'll walk through a handful of grants management recommendations, and then we can open it up for discussion. So one of the things that we sort of heard was there was inconsistency around the purpose of the grants. And I think depending on folks that we talked to, several folks, if you look at the history of when this funding was put in place, particularly post-Great Recession, it was an extension of the staffing complement for the Human Services Division was reduced. And I think in exchange, there was higher funding to some of these outside organizations who are providing services in this space that were still needed. And others that we talked to, as Julia mentioned, believe that, it's really kind of seed money. It's initial capital money for emerging or human services needs in the town. And I think what you'll see in the report is we don't feel like it has to be either or, it can be and or both. And so certainly the data supports that the ongoing needs sort of a portion of the viewpoint. Almost every organization has received, funding consistently in multiple years, which points to kind of they're providing a service as an extension of the town that is needed in the community. So there may be opportunities to sort of address the administrative workload for those types of, ongoing service needs. And in that state, there may be opportunities to do multi-year grants that can allow for better financial planning, both for the town and for the organizations, but there can still be the financial oversight through the annual budget process and the appropriation process and the contracting process to make sure that the funds are being used as intended and as awarded. Similarly or related, I think there can also be kind of one-time grant funds that are set up utilizing one-time funds for more short-term or pilot program needs. So as emerging needs arise, having a set of money that is unique to those emerging needs rather than ongoing needs. And there's opportunities to do both really with the way that the town allocates funding. One of the areas that was highly was a high level agreement among the applicants was the quarterly reporting, and some of that may be indicative of there could be opportunities to fine tune or streamline or be more specific about what's needed in that quarterly reporting. The town staff shared with us examples of what is received on a quarterly basis, and I think we were somewhat empathetic to that workload. There was quite a wide array of either really detailed information or not that much information, and so that could be challenging to kind of work through across multiple organizations. And so some of the recommendations that we have from a reporting perspective is to first make sure that the reporting requirements are programmatic. They're focused on the programmatic kind of expenditures and revenues compared to budget. They're estimating what the costs and the revenue sources are for the program that's delivering the services that you all are intending to fund. There was variation in terms of whether the quarterly reporting currently was programmatic or more organization-wide, and then it had to be determined how much of that relates to a specific program that you're actually funding. Where possible, I think it's important to ask for the workload metrics. How many clients are you serving? How many programs or outreach events did you hold, as an example? Performance metrics are always difficult in the nonprofit space for organizations of these size, but I think it's important to put it on the radar and make sure that they're trying to get a sense of outcome-based impact to these funds. And even if quantitatively that's difficult, there are opportunities to at least request narrative or qualitative information to say how it's impacting the residents and the clients that they're serving.
So
With that,
our intention would be to provide the town with a report and so Jericho will have a copy of the report, kind of go through a review process. We always want to make sure everything that's in there is accurate. We feel confident in it, but we want you all to check it. And we can provide that report relatively quickly, as long as there's no huge disconnects like that. You all have heard this, did we miss something big or something like that? But we feel relatively confident that we're on a track that could make some sense for you all. So happy at this point to just open it up to questions, and we'll do our best to respond to those today.
I'm assuming that if we don't have any questions today, but we have some on digestion.
Nope, that's it. No, this is the last one.
Sorry.
Of course. Oh, Malcolm has his hand up. Well, thank you for noticing that. How do we?
If I can ask if anyone on CHS has questions first. Or the select board.
I think there's
Yeah.
one question.
Why don't I sort of coordinate?
Okay.
Does that sound good?
Please.
Okay, so Malcolm's been unmuted, so Malcolm, you want to start?
Yeah, let's slide back or two. You talked about 9 out of 10 grants had been previously organizations had previously had grants before.
Yeah.
That always strikes me as like, who's not getting the grants, and why are we always doing the same grants, the same organizations?
Yeah.
This slide, yes.
Yeah, I
10 out
think
of
that,
11 organizations receiving funding had gotten funding each year in the past. That sounds like when I was at NIH grant reviews, we would always fight because every year we'd almost have the same people year after year getting all the money, and it was hard to get a new person in. Can you comment on that?
yeah, I think it speaks really directly to this issue of, are you providing funding so that an organization, almost in proxy for the town, is providing these services on your behalf? Versus what new ideas do we want to plant seeds for? And that's why we're suggested that, you know, it seems like there is a little bit of both, or there's a desire for both. And if that is the intention, then it would make sense to perhaps streamline the people who this is part of their budget every year. They need this amount of money. This is how the town ensures people receive these services. Versus here's money for new programs and ideas. So that's exactly the tension, Malcolm, that I think we saw as well, and just clarifying the town's intention around those buckets of money, I think could be really helpful.
Yeah, it'd be nice if we did allocate a certain amount for new programs, because it helps diversity, it helps new organizations. And it was the same problem we had at NIH.
A lot of head nodding in the room if you don't see it, Veronica.
Julie, if I can add on to that, I think without having the organized, marching orders that would come from either CHS or from whatever body, the CRC has recognized that we always have, we do have those ongoing needs, and we want to make sure we fund those ongoing needs. But we also try to encourage new programming because we want new. And just in this last grant cycle,
Well,
I
it's
think
10, but
sort of an ad hoc thing, we lopped off X amount saying this money is needed by those organizations because they have to exist. But we wanted to make sure and the smaller ones, that all of them get funded also. So as it was done in an ad hoc, it shouldn't be that way, I don't think, moving forward, but we've recognized that as just the committee and
Yeah.
trying to meet the needs.
Yeah, I think that's very grounded in,
Yeah.
you know, you don't have an accurate needs assessment, but you're in tune with the community, you know what's needed out there.
So I'm gonna go to Amanda, and then Sue, you'll be after Amanda.
So a few things. Did you see the GPS study that was done, 3 years ago? On the community needs, just out of curiosity.
The behavioral health
Yeah,
initiative,
initiative.
yes, that was part of the background that did.
And then the other thing is, there's obviously other organizations or groups on the island that go, do grants as well. And I don't know if there's an actual conversation that's being had between the town and say Community Foundation and other groups about who's giving money to who. And if like we ask, say what, I'm just wondering if that would be a beneficial thing, given there's a lot of other groups that are giving money to different organizations, and it's like to hear their perspective of why did we give X to this person and like not give anything to this person. And then my last thought is that obviously each year different organizations receive donations, for different events like fundraisers they have. And are we cautious about looking at how they're using the money that they get from the fundraiser versus the money they get from the town? Is there ever any overlap that's not maybe noticed?
So all good questions.
Yeah.
Sue?
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to respond to something to what Malcolm had just said, and to say that the variety of applications we get is not very large, and that most people who apply, most organizations that apply for these funds do get something. And so I'm wondering if that's indicative of us needing to do better outreach to get more organizations involved. But in my recent being part of the CRC, it does seem that it's not limited by us, the number of organizations that get the funding, because we really do try to spread it out amongst almost everyone who applies. I can think of very few exceptions of people not getting any funding.
Thanks, Sue.
Early in the presentation, you did a breakdown evaluation of the population, including the percent that were below poverty.
Yes.
Did you look at the ALICE population, so the asset limited population?
I don't think we had that data point, Emily, asset limited population.
Because that,
Yeah.
folks who are
Yeah,
asset
Specifically.
are probably more likely to actually be getting services than people that are below poverty. That
Yeah.
population is very large.
Mhm.
So I think it's important to take into account
Yeah.
folks within the population that are asset limited, living paycheck to paycheck and making the decisions about whether they're gonna feed their children next, just a meal.
Yeah, and that's why your needs assessment is so important.
Yeah.
Like, cause I think that speaks directly to, what is the need here? It's so much more than just poverty level.
And then a couple other things, in terms of who are getting funding from other places, one of the places I think we can solve that problem is in our application process to ask about who else are you getting services or funds from, and grants applied, grants received versus what you applied for. So this level of
Just
detail.
applied that to this year's RFP.
Yeah. So I think that piece of it's important. I think that there may be apprehension from other organizations to share information as to why they made budgetary decisions or allocation decisions. So I think that might be a little tough. But I think there are ways for us to gather more information that help us. And then the other thing that I was going to say is, I think that we need to align the funding guidelines with also our mission, so that we have the opportunity to say, this is not, the reason we're not going to give you any money is because it's not in alignment with our mission. And I think that's where also the needs assessment comes in, because our mission is something that we are looking at and changing. But also, if an organization is applying for funds that don't really meet what we as community, as CHS, define as the needs to be met, then I think we have that right to say, you get nothing. So I think the funding guidelines have to be really drilled down.
Yeah.
I'm just, in that first slide, what did jump out at me though was that is our census, the 14,000 people, but we know that's not really our population. And again, that it may be similar in some of those other towns, but we are pretty clear that it's well over that. And the other thing that jumped out at me was, I don't think that's the median home price.
No, it's
I think
funny.
it's a lot
This
higher
is a
than
couple
that.
of years old. and
Okay.
It's shocking to me how much it's gone up. But
Yeah.
again, when you're trying to compare data, you want to have a current data set from each of the communities. And so this is the one that we could get.
I
But
figured
yeah,
that was the answer, but I
Yeah.
think that then that plays into
Oh,
the needs assessment, obviously, that
huge.
drills down on it
Yeah.
more.
Madam Chair, just on that point specifically, so in most of those other communities, the pool of human service funding is not completely issued by the municipality, which means that while those are excellent benchmark numbers to begin a comparison on, it's not quite apples to apples, because there's state, there's county, and then there's federal spending that does not get delivered quite with the same efficiency. And then also, and this probably speaks to the median household increase, service delivery is vastly more expensive on Nantucket. So those are things that it's an excellent initial start, but it's something that needs to be kept. It's not exactly apples to apples.
Yeah, I would be concerned, I had a peek at some of these numbers a few weeks ago, and of course, the hair on my back went up, because we know that we get much more ask than the money that we have to give. And without a updated needs assessment, we really can't back it up. But if the public sees these numbers in comparison, they'll say, gee, Nantucket is doing $45
Yeah.
per, as opposed to your next lowest is 27, so you've already have it all. And we know that's not true, so if we either have to put an asterisk next to this and explain why, or maybe have it rejiggered in some way.
Yeah, I always, whenever we're sharing kind of benchmark information, I always tell people, you should walk away, you're gonna, it tells you what questions to ask. It doesn't always give you the answers. And so it's really, well, why is it so different? And maybe it's because there's state funding, or maybe it's because they're getting CDBG pass-throughs, or some nuance that's different. And the other thing to recognize is that you all have made decisions as a community of how you want to take care of each other. And this is part of it. And so it is part of who Nantucket is, to take care of the people that live here. And so, there's no right number in all of these numbers. It's not that 47 is the right number or that 5 is. It's what's right for your community. And you know better than anybody what needs you aren't meeting. And there's always more.
I'll have a comment on that, but John's got his hand up. John?
I have a couple of observations. I'm probably the longest serving member of the CRC. Certainly, one thing that's developed over the years since I've been there was the creation of the Community Foundation, and that's clearly an area where we have not collaborated with, and that is our current chair is actively seeking to do that in a more greater fashion. But an observation with respect to many of the continuing applicants, a large number of them have other funding for other parts of what they do. We don't fund the total operation of any group that comes to us. They typically come to us for very specific needs, which in the certain situations, it is ongoing, but it is only part of what they do, and it is a minor part of their total funding from other sources. And the final observation I have to make is that this is partially addressed to what Malcolm said. We know we have a population that needs essentially the English as a second language population, that have needs that we cannot get to unless somebody and people with organizational ability from that community get themselves organized to be able to make their needs known to us. And one of the problems we have with this population is, as I have been given to understand, we have a Spanish-speaking population, except that they are segmented among themselves. And so the Salvadorans don't speak to the Costa Ricans or don't socialize with them, and so they don't collaborate. The Portuguese stay to themselves, and the Jamaicans tend to stay within their own communities, which makes it very difficult for us, unless they come forward to us, to identify, even in a special needs situation, things that we are not in a position to recognize, partially because of just we aren't part of their cultures. And it's more of a general observation. I will say one other thing. I was on the Council for Human Services for many years, but unfortunately we never really coalesced at any of the time I was there to be a very efficient functioning organization, and it kind of died of its own weight. And that's really how I got onto the contract review committee, because I was a designated member from the Human Services Committee, and I am now a member at large. But that was for many years, we were really the only organization that was in a position to deal effectively with the town's money. And we had a number of somewhat dysfunctional, I won't say a number, a couple of rather dysfunctional human services independent organizations that they needed the money and we needed the services, but we had in some cases had to really step in and try and help them organize themselves. And that is something I'm not sure that as large a body as the Council for Human Services, unless it gets really much more active than it has been in the past, is in a position to do. Enough of my blithering.
Yeah, on the slide with all the numbers with the comparative towns, to Dawn's point about uniquenesses, and I know everybody in this room knows this very, very well, being involved in the human services area, but Nantucket has several very unique factors, 30 miles out to sea, the fact that we're kind of limited geographically for the number of nonprofits that may or may not be able to exist, et cetera, et cetera. And also our seasonal nature of our economy. A lot of folks, as you all know with the food pantry, we get a huge uptake in the beginning of the season when the J1s, the H1 and 2Bs come in. And those are resources that need to be allocated. And that's a little different from the rest of the year, the year-round folks and or programming from all the nonprofits. So I think those numbers are they're interesting to look at, but they don't, to Dawn's point, they don't tell the whole story and the uniquenesses that we have here.
So for me, you know, the Community Foundation is very interesting because I'm quite sure that most of the organizations that are applying for money from the town are also applying to the Community Foundation. So is there a way to contract some of maybe the review of financials, the verification of the financial strength of the organization, et cetera? If that's being done twice, it doesn't need to be done twice, right? And that would save some time, people time, both staff and volunteer time, to maybe do a contract with them, with the Community Foundation. And then also then marrying that, the needs assessment, sharing it with the Community Foundation, right? So that everybody who's making grants across the community is seeing the same needs assessment in human services. And then the other thing that I was gonna say is we don't know the people in need unless they identify themselves. And so there's this catch-22 of, we think we know what the need is, but we have to reach the people in need. And I know the organization that I'm with is doing that in food insecurity. And to some extent, you develop programming and then people hear about the programming and they say, I'd like that programming. And then the need outstrips the funding, right? And so waiting lists and so forth. But, you know, that's a helpful metric, interestingly, in knowing what the true needs of the community are. And it's a bit of a chicken and egg conundrum. And I don't know, just making people feel safe speaking up about need is a challenge, I think. That everyone would agree, whether that's behavioral health or food or housing or whatever it is. And so having the fact that we are concerned and that we have a Council for Human Services and that people are interested in knowing what the community needs and having that out there more in the community through a needs assessment, a really proactive and organized needs assessment, and have that built into the budget, that we update that periodically in the service of doing human services well or funding it well.
And that the chicken and the egg thing, that's exactly, you've got to, where are we, you know, kind of always, it's always evolving, and you need to be able to acknowledge that. And that's doing it every 3 years, I think really would make the most sense.
Yeah.
For you all.
So specifically on the kind of partnerships that we could be doing to reduce admin time, as well as better coordinate funding across private and public funding agencies, there's a couple of steps. Like I've worked with Sunny on the Sunny Daly from CFN on the behavioral health initiative, the CSBH, as it's now formulated. We have a couple of potential ways to partner that would be relatively things like joint technological purchases. They have an existing grant platform that they've been using for a couple of years. They've got most of the nonprofits trained on it. It addresses quite a few of the recommendations that have come out through this review, as well as things that have been discovered by former CHS members, current CHS members, and CRC members alike. So there's a couple of ways that we can streamline this process and make it so that you could apply once and be available for multiple grants over the time of the year, over the course of the year. And that we could be looking at ways to pair public and private grant money so that there'd be matching funds that would have money that would be unencumbered by our financial regulations. So private money could be used as seed money for a new program, and that could be available outside of our fiscal year cycle. So there's definitely room for us to partner with them in a way that would make it significantly more flexible and maybe more user-friendly to the providers, as well as reducing the sort of centralized overhead.
Yeah, and the grants portal thing is a really great, because I've used it, and it's really easy when you've applied for a grant. You can basically just copy it and edit and not have to start from scratch. And the time savings on that is enormous.
And then it all goes into a single pool for reporting. If we have the correct license agreement with them, we could be capturing metrics for performance and impact across a variety of different grants in a centralized location, which we then can turn around and use for external grants. Because one of the major strengths of our grant system is it allows programs to develop evidence of their success, which they then can use to offset the town money by going to larger grants.
Yeah.
Jericho or Madam Chair, may I please ask about the new ranking system that you guys have instituted this year? I'm curious, is it like Rory's that Capcom does?
It's not quite that
complicated.
No, okay, that's good for you.
So what the particular methodology that is, it evolved out of the youth behavioral health grant, and it was designed around a set of needs versus coverage, designed to kind of track consistently how many people are being served by it. It was in a first step towards a more transparent and consistent way of measuring it. My experience with rubrics is primarily actually quite a bit of it is pulled from Greenwich as well. That's a good point. But my experience with rubrics is primarily in an educational point of view, where I'm providing rubrics to students so they know what to work towards. So I would definitely be looking for a more robust and industry standardized one, just because I think that'll make things simpler and more transparent.
And I think I can add on to that. And this is Jericho's phrasing here, is that we're changing the tire as we're riding the bike, whatever. So we know that we have to keep going even as we're evolving. So in this RFP that was released on October 1st, we with CRC and actually our meeting that we had last week, a week ago Friday, members of CHS attended as members of the public. So as we were going through the application and trying to take all of the questions that we as CRC come up with after we get these grants, and we look and we say, well, this piece of information is missing, so we're going to go out and ask about this. So we tried to take all of those little bits and pieces and incorporate it into the new application. And CHS members actually helped as members of the public, so I appreciate their participation that way. And it was just on a who can attend and volunteer basis. But as we know that we have lots of work to do in this process on that's right now happening on the 18th, we are going to have a bidders information session that will explain to the applicants the changes that we've put into place right now and why. And we're encouraging everyone to attend. And if they can attend, We're working on a PowerPoint that will be available with that information all up to fill in the pieces. And I think Jericho will also do some office hours if people can't be there. As I said, we know that I think, I don't want to negate, I've been involved with this process for 2 years, and I know that it's the passion and the dedication of everyone involved with this process is unmatched by anything I've ever seen. But we know that it shouldn't produce so much angst. And I'll say, from just being on the committee and trying to make these decisions, it's really difficult, and it's hard to sometimes sleep at night because the need is great. And I'm also fiscally responsible that we can't just keep saying, just give us more money, because, you know, there's more need out there. So the needs assessment, everything needs to fall into place. So we appreciate everything that we're getting in this report. And I appreciate the town in supporting doing this process, because sometimes you just have to stop and say, all right, let's take a look at what's happening, because we're running down the road trying to get everything done and don't have a moment to take a breath to say, wait a second, it doesn't have to be this difficult, you know. So thank you.
Yeah, the other thing that I would say is that, you know, the different organizations have vastly different degrees of complexity to their overall budgets, right? And I found that when I was on CRC, the thing that was really hard is to take a small organization with a simple budget and compare it to a large organization that has myriad of different funding sources, insurance reimbursements, et cetera. And so to me, my dream would be that there is a simplified financial statement that could be standardized across large and small organizations, you know, that reflects the overall budget of the organization, and then a project budget that is, you know, what it's staffing, what supplies, what's this, what's that, and what percentage of the revenue is being requested from CRC. And I think having the financial stuff consistent, you know, sometimes we got a 7-page budget from an organization, and sometimes we got a half a page. And it was really hard to compare. And it's also, I'll say, really hard to compare them when you think about organizations that have the bandwidth to do big fundraisers and ones that don't. And it's complicated, but I think if the application is super clear and is consistent, as we make it as consistent, regardless of the size of the organization, the job of figuring it out gets a lot easier for the volunteers, for sure.
The introduction of the rubric will significantly improve that. And I'd say we're about half to a third of the way of a standardized reporting form that'll be the same on application and quarterly.
That's right.
And also make us presenting our report and recommendation at the end of each year significantly more straightforward, so we can just be listing the specifics of the organization, the specifics of the grant, what was done, and then whatever we end up landing on for impact and efficiency metrics, more or less.
I found it interesting that the organizations reported that these things were simple and clear to understand, but the people making the decisions weren't clear about what information they were providing. So there's definitely a disconnect.
And it's in part, I think the clarity is that for them, it's easy because they can just give whatever we give you, you take it. Thank you very much. Your job is hard. My job is.
Exactly. And I think that's where we're never really gonna be able to compare apples to apples across all of these things, but that's why the design of the rubric and the application and the questions that are asked around financials and around funding are so important for us to actually understand. The way that I like to think about it is, where's the dollar gonna be impactful? So if, you know, you're giving to one organization that has a huge, you know, fundraising capability, and they're seeking funds for a specific program, you know, how does that offset a smaller organization that doesn't have the infrastructure to do these, you know, major events? You know, that dollar incrementally can have much greater impact on one organization than another. And I think that's why when we go through the process, we have to make sure that we're really understanding the true impact of what's being given. I have a bias also towards, organizations that spend a lot of money on fundraising. I don't think that's actually, is not something that, I think it's something that we also look at as a metric. If you're doing a fundraiser and you raise, $100,000, but you spent $85,000 to do that, then, I'm like, these are not efficiencies that,
Yeah, Julie, can I have one more question? Merging, your recommendation of merging CRC, CHS, can you give background on why? So I'm trying to understand the benefit of doing that. So I know the way that it's been done, maybe not efficiently or proper way, but why would you recommend that?
Well, it's another layer. And I guess the question is, how does the additional layer add value to the process? And you could decide it adds a lot of value and that's okay. It just seems like when I look at my observation of seeing the activity of the CHS versus the CRC, is that some of the wind was out of the sails. Like there's clear purpose around the CRC, and the CHS, it was a little muddled. And so why is the subcommittee's work so clear, but the board's work unclear? And it makes me wonder, why do you need the subcommittee if the committee could do the work and is connected to this? And so, we don't see it in other communities. I'm not sure that when I say, does it add value, there is huge amount of value being done by the volunteers, like tremendous amount of work. So please don't take it as saying it's not necessary. The work needs to be done. The question is having it being done by a subcommittee useful to you all? Or would it actually be more energizing for the CHS to be the body that develops the policy, shares it with the select board, and then implements the grant program and uses the staff that you have, supplementing with, appropriate volunteer time or contracts or whatever, but that you work with the staff to do that work instead of with another committee. So that's why I would say it's question one of a nonprofit agency that I worked with for a long time. They had the saying that was, if the prince can throw a bigger party than the king, it doesn't seem to make much sense. So it's, it just seems like that's where there's clarity.
Can I just add, sorry.
Go ahead, Dawn.
I just want to caution, I don't want to get into a situation where we've had some really dedicated volunteers who have done the CRC essentially for free.
Yeah.
To where we have to, where we go back to having it put more on staff, which then forces us to outsource to the community foundation, which I'm assuming is going to have a pretty substantial cost. So that's just the only thing that I want to make sure that we're weighing.
Yeah.
As we're talking about this.
And is that level of volunteerism really sustainable? I mean, I think that's another.
It has been for a long time.
It has been.
So just to add to that, being within also another community, obviously Greenwich, Connecticut, it is merged and it's all volunteer. And basically it would be having essentially CRC members becoming members of CHS. And the way that we allocate the work is, and it's a lot of work. We've been doing it for years, but we have put into place a system that we sort of as a team divide, conquer, and, do the evaluations as teams and then bring it back to the larger group. And so there's a way that it can be done that still is incredibly respectful of the CRC. And, it creates a lot of collegiality as well.
I just wanted to say, I'm totally fine with something that keeps it in the volunteer sphere.
Yeah.
And doesn't bring in additional layers
No,
of cost by outsourcing.
So
So that's, I just wanted to make that point.
specifically on that labor side, the staff work is already significant. I've been tracking hours for both Tamika and for Alexandria, who replaced Tamika when she moved up to office manager. And we spend in terms of labor that they're doing under this particular grant, when there are other things that they could be doing, we spend somewhere on the order of probably $25,000 to $30,000 of staff time on this that could be reduced significantly by introducing efficiencies into the system, by adopting more modern practices. I've been very mindful of adding another layer of outsourcing into this in a variety of different ways. And that's something that's on my mind, but we would also be getting a level of value out of a grant specialist that we're not getting from volunteers. No one who has sit on the contract review committee is a forensic accountant, for example. So there's definitely, that's something that I'm paying very, very close attention to, because I wanna optimize how this works in a frictionless and smooth way that allows as many people to access it. Because I do think there's unmet need right now, and I think that if we get our own system in order, we'll be more able to address that.
John?
Well, I think a little of this discussion has obscured the history of why the CRC was created in the first place. And before I get to that, I want to point out that Jericho has been working with us from the town for what is it, 2 years? Jericho?
Four.
time flies.
Well, anyway, before Jericho arrived, there was very little town support for any of the activities that either CHS was doing or the CRC was doing. Other than, I should say, we had the support for creating paperwork, but not for the kind of work, analytical work that Jericho has been doing. So that we had to do it, we had to kind of do it all on our own. And it hitched along reasonable, but not in the way it was most efficient. On the other hand, you need to recognize that the CRC has a designated member from the Finance Committee, has a designated member from the NEPDC or whatever it's called, and it used to have a designated member from the Select Board as people from the town who were, should I say, monitoring how the town money was being spent. So the CRC is kind of a mixed situation. It is not effectively, because of the way we allocate the money, we are creating a certain amount of policy, which the CHS clearly could do, help us with. But I'm not sure that you want your monitors from the town representing the town also being on the CHS. So we are considered stewards of the town's money that the town makes available to us. We aren't creating policy. Our job is really to accept the applications and make sure that the town's money is spent effectively for the town with the support from the town human services department. And so I'm not sure that the observations of getting perceived efficiencies from trying to merge the two really exactly meet the situation that we have, at least currently have, and which the town has in the past wanted. And I think it's up to the town has got to decide that, well, maybe we don't need to have this kind of supervision, but I can certainly say having a member of the finance committee has been tremendously valuable. And I wouldn't trade that for a minute.
Exactly.
We did lose our representative from the select board, but that's a story from the past that's humorous, but we don't need to go into it.
I'm curious. Okay, so, Julia, advise on next steps.
So we will get a copy of the report over to the town so everyone can read the details. And then go from there. I mean, essentially, we'll make any adjustments that we need to. And then obviously you all are welcome to reach out to me through Jericho, Libby, whoever, if you have questions that you want us to follow up on, but our work is done.
So I would say from my perspective, on the select board, that I would hope that CHS and CRC would have a continued conversation about how, and maybe come back to the select board with the recommendation on any changes to organizational structure. That's more what we will have to decide, right, at the select board level, is are we gonna change the organizational structure? And then, we did commit the strategic plan a year ago for the needs assessment to follow this assessment. So we recognize that was gonna be needed, and
the way recommendation one, so to speak, is worded, is that, we see a need for some kind of communication, collaboration between the committees and frankly, with the select board too, in terms of, what makes sense to you all. I think overarching policy, yes, you want a recommendation and also needs to make sense for you. So we would imagine that to be very collaborative.
And I recognize you guys are in grant cycle at the moment, so adding this to your plate immediately, I would say that what we would want to do is have this, if there's going to be any reorganizing, having it in the, spring, when you guys are done with your work, or after town, the warrant's been done and the grants are recommended, then maybe we sit down and make any organizational changes so that it's right for the next cycle. The timing of it's
As for
important.
the general outline that we're working on is that we will finish this grant cycle with few, as little fiddling with the bicycle as we can while we're riding it. And then, take a lessons learned and review in collaboration with CHS this spring to clearly delineate who's going to do what the responsibilities are. Probably get to the point where we land on an initial state for the standardized reporting and standardized application process. And then what we're really going to try and build in is a rubric review between both CHS and CRC. What we found with the first use of the rubric is that people meant different things by what was listed in the rubric. So having that discussion to say what's what is sort of our plan. We would absolutely love to have Rautalis or other mediator involved. I think having outside perspectives on what's worked elsewhere would be very helpful. But that's the general outline of what we're planning on doing.
Well, keep us posted on where we can support and then where you need to come back and get input from us. All right, I know you guys have some business to take care of, which we were going to adjourn us. We could do that quickly if you guys want to run.
I think we literally have 2 roll call votes.
Okay, I'm just going to adjourn us. So
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
okay, by roll call, Don,
Aye.
Tom,
Aye.
Malcolm,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. So select board's free to go, and the CHS is going to continue.
And does this Zoom stay on or?
This stays on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so contract review committee, what we need to do is we need to adjourn our meeting from September 27th, 2024. Since we lost quorum, so can I have a motion? Make motion, second?
This is CRC.
Yeah, CRC.
I'll make the motion.
Okay, yeah, all right. And
I'll second it.
thank you. All right, so,
Motion to adjourn, John,
Aye.
Bert,
Aye.
Sue,
I
Joanna?
don't see Joanna anymore.
Did you drop a phone again?
No, we're still there. Okay, and myself, so we've adjourned our meeting from the 27th and now we can, there's no other business.
So we can adjourn.
We can now adjourn this meeting, so
Contract.
review. So can I have a motion to adjourn
Motion
today's? Bert, thank you. Second?
Aye.
Second,
Okay. Sue? All right, so here we go with another roll call. Bert,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
Sue,
I.
and myself, Veronica. So thank you very much. That meeting's adjourned. So now I'm switching over to Council for Human Services.
Do you have a hat?
Yes.
We're switching that back.
Same hat. So what we need to do is we need to appoint one more person to the Council for Human Contract, to the Contract Review Committee from CHS. At last meeting, I was not in attendance and Sue Minthinen was appointed as the first person. So can I please have a motion to make an appointment?
Yes, make a motion.
Thank you.
Make an appointment for, we have that.
Yes, and I said the full motion should be for appointment to.
Right, okay. I'm gonna make a motion for an appointment to the contract review.
So. Thank you. Can I have a second?
Second,
All right. A vote to appoint me to the Contract Review Committee. That's Veronica. So here we go. Sarah,
Aye.
Tara,
Aye.
Amanda,
Aye.
Kelly,
Aye.
Sue,
I.
and Suzanne.
Aye.
All right, and myself, I accept, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, all right,
Thank you.
here we go. Well, thank you. And I appreciate all the support of both committees. Any other business? I know that our next meeting, and I'm just looking at the calendar, the next meeting for CHS will be on the 24th of October at 4 o'clock. And
The 17th.
the 17th? 18th.
18th. Oh, yeah, sorry, the 18th.
The 18th is Contract Review Committee. And I encourage, if Contract Review can attend and vice versa for both, so.
What time is that meeting?
The Contract Review, we haven't said it yet, but it'll probably be 9 o'clock in the morning, it'll be 9
And
AM.
is that available via Zoom? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
You can log in as a member of the public.
Yeah.
We're on that one.
Just, yeah, because I know one organization off island that wants to.
Just let them know, the
Yes.
link should be in the agenda and you can have them get a copy of the event that people can.
Right, right, and we will have that done this Friday, so we'll have the agenda done this Friday, so.
Yeah.
All right. Motion to adjourn.
Wait, can I have a question for,
Oh, I'm sorry, Suzanne, yes.
sorry, I'm kind of confused between, did we just set a time for the next CHS meeting? And then we started talking about CRC?
Yes, CHS is gonna be on the 24th at 4 o'clock, so it's a Thursday afternoon at 4.
Thank you. Thank you.
And CRC, we are meeting on the 18th, which is a Friday, time to be determined, but it'll probably be 9 o'clock. And that is going to be when we are having our bidders information session.
Yeah.
So we are gonna be inviting anybody interested in applying, with the, request for proposals to attend. All right, so adjourn, so,
Motion to.
motion to adjourn, okay? Second, all right. So here we go again, Suzanne,
Aye.
Sue,
I.
Sarah,
Aye.
Tara,
Aye.
Amanda,
Aye.
Kelly,
Aye.
myself, I thank you very much. Very, 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 helpful meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Thank you.
He's the chair.
Right.
And
Erica,
co-chair.
are you still on?
Of CHS is Sue. Right.
Yes,
And
I'm
then-
still on. So somebody needs to go to the laptop. And
Rick's got it.
Is
End
that,
the
is
meeting.
anybody, I have a question for you. Is anybody in the trailer till between now and 5:30?
let me just double check.
I can peek.
Sue-
That's the race.
No, nobody else.
All right, thank you. I'm gonna end the meeting.
Thank you.
It's